Welcome to Current Affairs. My name is Nathan Robinson. I'm the editor-in-chief of Current Affairs magazine. I am joined today by Andrés Jiménez Zorrilla. He is the chairman of the board of the Shrimp Welfare Project, an organization dedicated to improving the welfare of farmed shrimp. Andrés, welcome to Current Affairs.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Now, I had to talk to you. I absolutely had to talk to you because you wrote an article recently for Asterisk magazine, which has a wonderful opening line, or two opening lines. You say, it begins, I left private equity to work on shrimp welfare. When I tell anyone this, they usually think I've lost my mind. I think that's as a piece of writing, as an opener for an article, that's a killer. I love that. I had to just keep reading after that because it does highlight the fact. I think what it gets at is anyone who leaves private equity, which is a famously lucrative profession, to work on shrimp welfare, has to have become convinced that shrimp welfare is incredibly important. And I think for the average person reading it, they will wonder what could possibly have made you make that choice. They probably, I think, statistically, probably it's safe to say, most people have not given a second's consideration to shrimp welfare in their life. So why don't we start by telling us a little bit about that life choice that you made to shift from the making of money to the addressing of the welfare of farmed shrimp.
Sure. No, I appreciate you touching upon that, because I do think that most people would assume that I have lost my mind. And I think that was my first reaction when I read about the problem of shrimp as a moral patient. But the more I looked into it, the more I followed the evidence of the staggering number of individual shrimp that are farmed every year, which stands in approximately 500 billion per year. And the evidence, at least back then, limited evidence of their sentience, but much greater evidence now. And the fact that it was completely neglected and essentially no more than maybe one or two, if any, people in the whole world were trying to improve the situation to the extent possible. I thought, well, my co-founder and I thought that this was very important for us to focus on. So I appreciate you giving me the time to talk about this important problem.
Well, what's interesting, as I say, from that first line, you really do want to read the rest of the article. And when you do read the rest of the article, I think you do a good job of convincing people to start thinking about something that they probably haven't thought about before. And, there's this famous term, the charismatic megafauna. That is the animals people care about. The pandas. They're cute. We all love the pandas. We all love Mu Deng, the famous hippo. We love Mu Deng, the famous hippo. She's a charismatic megafauna. You work on what I would consider the opposite end of the spectrum, which is the uncharismatic microfauna. The tiniest, the animals that aren't nearly as photogenic in the human sense. You're really trying to make the case for a creature that does not naturally lend it doesn't possess the qualities that lead human beings to be naturally sympathetic to it, such as our concept of cuteness. But you argue that that's not morally relevant.
Strangely enough. No, absolutely. And look, I think I've lost my sense of aesthetics when it comes to animals. Someone once asked me for cute shrimp pictures, and I sent them a few. And they responded and said, well, clearly you've been at this for way too long.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. And this is, I guess, one of the reasons why people haven't focused on this very important problem. Now there are some folks who are focusing on even smaller, less sympathy commanding animals like insects. But at least when we launched the organizations, we were definitely on the fringe. But as you said, strangely enough, aesthetics and cuteness is not a variable that should influence our perception of moral patienthood or not, which sounds extremely obvious when you say it out loud, but it's not an intuition that any of us grow up with, or most of us grow up with.
And so if we set aside our natural intuitions and prejudices and we start to kind of think rationally and we say, okay, we believe in animal rights as a basic principle, we certainly would apply the ideas to our dogs and our cats. And what you take us through is the reasoning process that gets us to why we should care about shrimp. And it seems to me from your article that this kind of has two components. The first is the evidence that shrimp can have experience, that they are sentient beings that can in fact suffer. And then the second is the kind of quantitative element, which is rather shocking. And maybe actually we could take those in the opposite order, because I think one of the things that really is mind-blowing about your article is when you present the quantitative data on just how many shrimp are farmed in the world. I mean, I don't think people realize the percentage of animal farming that is just shrimp.
Absolutely. No, this was basically when my co-founder and I launched the organization. It's the quantitative part of it that really hooked us, because back then the evidence, these animals had been less studied than they have been today. But just when you think of the numbers and these roughly 500 billion farmed shrimp every year, to give you perspective, around 100 billion humans are the total number who have ever walked the earth. And we grow and slaughter around 5 times that every year, shrimps. So in terms of the numbers, it's huge. And if you put it into, if you compare it to the number of total land farmed animals, for example, to give a sense of the magnitude of the numbers that we're speaking about, the total land farmed animals all put together, cattle, chicken, etc., that would be roughly between 80 and 90 billion animals every year. And shrimp alone, 2 species, are approximately 500 billion, so 500 billion. So when we're talking really about factory farming worldwide, we are really talking about shrimp. That's the reality.
You have this incredible pie chart that when people see it, I think this is kind of an eye-opening moment to look at that one pie chart, which is number of animals alive on farms at any moment. And it's mostly shrimp. It's 51% shrimp. The majority of animals on farms at any given time in the entire world are shrimp. And cattle and pigs, less than 1%. So we really are talking about, it's not an exaggeration what you just said, which is that when we're talking about the farming of animals, if we add up the individual animals, it is mostly shrimp out there.
Yeah, and this work was done by Reaching Priorities. This it has a lot of work behind it, but essentially it is the species that are by far the most, as you said, alive at any moment in farms at any given moment.
Why is? I mean, what is the nature of? Where are all these shrimp going? I mean, is this just every country just eats a lot of seafood? You've studied the industry here. What's going on here? How did we get to the point where shrimp are the majority of animals alive on farms at any given moment?
So I think it's threefold, I would say. It's the total volume of shrimp consumed in the world is about 6 million metric tons. So that's already a lot. But I think what makes it much greater in terms of number of animals alive at any moment is the fact that they're small animals. So if you divide the number of cows that you would need to feed a family, it's much greater the number of shrimp to provide them with the equivalent amount of animal protein, right? So that's one part, and the other one is they have very short life cycle. So they are being produced and harvested and slaughtered 2 or 3 times a year. So those would be the explaining factors, and we haven't even touched upon the number of shrimp that are caught in the wild, which the numbers are just mind blowing. They're in the order of 30 trillion shrimp per year. This also comes from this paper that I refer to from Rethink Priorities in my article. It's not in the article because my organization focuses exclusively on farm shrimp at the moment, but the number of wild caught shrimp is also astronomical.
Hi, sorry to interrupt, but if you like this video, please subscribe to this channel for more wonderful current affairs material in the future, and head to currentaffairs.org/subscribe to subscribe to our beautiful print magazine today. But in order to get to why this is a problem worth working on, then we have to go back to that component of there is a moral dimension to what happens to shrimp. And this is where I think you have the kind of heavy burden here, because people can look at this pie chart and they could see, wow, that's a surprising fact. I'd never thought about that before. But they could say, and probably many of them do say, but I don't really care. I care about the cattle and the pigs because I know that pigs and cattle are like dogs. They feel emotions. They are sophisticated creatures. Shrimp, yeah, we can eat as many of them as they like because they're shrimp. They're tiny, as you said. Why should anyone care what happens to a shrimp? They're so unsophisticated. And so here, this is where you lay out all of the evidence, all of the research that builds up towards their being a moral aspect to what happens to a shrimp.
Correct. And I think we can unfold it, we can double click on that, and there's two things. It's either they're not sentient and we don't care, or they're sentient and the conditions on farms are great, and again, we don't care.
Okay.
So we need to kind of talk about both. The first one is the evidence of sentience. As I mentioned a couple of times, when we launched the organization, the evidence of sentience was relatively limited. But fortunately for us, right after we launched the organization, the UK government, as part of a revamp of their animal welfare legislation, they commissioned a report from the London School of Economics to look at the evidence of cephalopods and decapods. Cephalopods are octopuses, squid, and decapods are crabs, lobsters, and shrimp. And because there is no smoking gun to decide a system is sentient or not, even with humans, I need to assume that you're sentient because you're similar to me and because you're telling me that you are feeling something. But I cannot definitively prove from outside that you are feeling what you're telling me that you're feeling. So what researchers do with animals is that they look at proxies of behavioral proxies for sentience that would indicate something similar to what we can appreciate in humans. And that's what the researchers at London School of Economics did. They looked at a number of different elements, including having the right body parts to feel pain, so nociceptors, having the right neural architecture to feel that pain and to integrate it, and then to see the responses that animals show to different noxious stimuli. So they have 8 different criteria, and they rank the degree of evidence that one has in each of them. And if we look at the decapod family as a whole, there is very strong evidence that they fulfill either strongly or very strongly each of these 8 categories. So the recommendation from researchers was to unequivocally include decapods, which include shrimp, as animals recognized as sentient in the new animal welfare law. And then Rethink Priorities, Bob Fisher and his team prepared a very interesting piece as well called the Welfare Range Table, where they look at hundreds of different behaviors that would indicate sentience, and they look at this is a much more in-depth analysis of the existing evidence, and they see that shrimp can show anxiety-like states, They groom they tend to their wounds, and this behavior is different when you apply anesthetics or analgesics, which would suggest that it is not a reflex. So there's a number of behaviors that all put together would strongly indicate that there's something going on in there.
Yeah. Well, you're talking there about people who've applied a very systematic and careful method to really kind of quantify, degree of confidence in sentience. But I've heard you mention before in a conversation that a one kind of counterintuitive or unexpected thing is that the people who farm shrimp tend to, more than the general public, when you survey them, believe in the sentience of shrimp. And you might think, well, the shrimp farmers, clearly, if you ask them, they'll go, no, I mean, shrimp, because they have to farm them, so you would expect them to be kind of indifferent. But actually, they understand this perhaps better than the average member of the general public.
That's an extremely good point. I think we ran a survey of farmers in India 1 year after having launched the organization. And if my memory serves me well, it was something like 90 to 95% of the farmers that we interviewed. And when we asked them the question, do you think that your shrimp can feel pain? And they all said yes. Some actually, even one had a very endearing quote that said something like, when my shrimp are happy, I am happy. And if they are sad, I suffer too. Because they are much more attuned to, I wouldn't say individuality, but they see these animals when they're alive, and they are showing their natural behaviors, and they see the animals. Most people who eat shrimp, at least in the developed world, have never seen a live shrimp in their lives. So that makes a huge difference to the way that we relate to an animal.
Now, you mentioned earlier that there is the question of whether shrimp are sentient, and you have touched on some of the evidence that they can feel pain. But you said that we could say, okay, but the conditions are fine. So then we get to that second part that you mentioned, which is the inquiry into how are shrimp farmed, and are they farmed in a way that raises a serious moral issue. Obviously, you have concluded that point number one, they are sentient, but point number two, they are farmed in ways that are abhorrent, and that hurt them and that are avoidable. So tell us a little bit more about the conditions that shrimp are raised under that you think makes this a compelling moral issue.
Sure. And one important point to mention right off the bat is that not every shrimp suffers from all of the elements that I will mention. Perhaps some don't. I think for the most part they do. But a normal life in a typical farming environment for a shrimp is a female has its eye cut off. That's the kind of the way that the life of a farm shrimp starts. So researchers a few decades ago realized that by crushing one of the eyes of a female would start laying eggs more predictably. And it's easier to have a female reproduce and spawn when this eye is removed. So the first thing is an eye is cut off from a female without any anesthetic, obviously. This female lays hundreds of thousands of eggs. These eggs eventually hatch, so you have baby shrimp. These baby shrimp, between natural mortality or mortality that happens in this early stage and cannibalism at this early stage, you have about 50% of those roughly would die. Of the ones that survive, they are then, after a few days, are transferred into either an intermediate pond or what they call a grow-out pond, where they would live the next 3 to 4 months. And there, the conditions vary, but you have in the two ends of the spectrum. One, you can have a system where the water can be controlled to the last, most minute element of it, a small tank where dissolved oxygen is monitored and maintained, where the presence of poisonous gases are detected and eliminated and managed. But typically, because of all the investment that these systems require, the animals are overcrowded and they cannot express their natural behaviors, which tend to be that they burrow under the sand and they rest at the bottom of a pond. Here, because they're packed so tightly, they need to be swimming all the time and they cannot express their natural behaviors. And they're really stressed. And if you have a disease outbreak, this can spread very quickly.
Mm.
On the other side of the spectrum, you have sometimes ponds that are very large with very low stocking densities, only 5 to 10 animals per square meter, versus the other system that I mentioned was probably 500 per square meter. These other systems, the animals can express their natural behaviors, but because it's a larger pond, it behaves more like a natural ecosystem. And there you have fluctuating levels of dissolved oxygen, fluctuating levels of poisonous gases. And here, the problem is that you can have animals with very poor immune systems. And again, disease outbreaks. This is just a normal thing that happens in shrimp farming. And in these types of ponds, it's frequent that you have mortality rates of 30-40% of all the animals that were put initially in this last pond. And the last element of shrimp farming would be a harvest, which is the moment in which the animals are taken out of the water and slaughtered. The gold standard is to submerge the shrimps in cold ice, in ice slurry, and that has proven to be not effective enough to render animals unconscious when you look at the brain activity using EEG method. So it's actually appears to be a very painful experience, and this is the gold standard typically before Shrimp Welfare Project started with its humane slaughter initiative, which I'm sure we will touch upon.
Well,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
So then the question here is, you're sort of inherently engaged in harm mitigation rather than elimination, because you're not going to, given the sheer volume that you're looking at here, the idea of eliminating the consumption of shrimp overnight is inconceivable. So I take it you've thought a lot about, well, what are some feasible recommendations that could be adopted? What are some standards that, given the industry that we have in the world as it exists now, we think might be adopted that would go some way towards eliminating the worst aspects of this? And I know one of the things that you do is you emphasize, you touched on there the cutting of the eyes. Maybe we can get rid of that. Maybe we can have shrimp more in an environment that resembles what they would have naturally. So tell us a little bit more about, pragmatically, if we believe that, well, we've accomplished the very hard part of getting people to take shrimp welfare seriously, we're not going to accomplish the impossible part of eliminating the farming of shrimp tomorrow. What are the things that you think are like best practice legislation that we can encourage the adoption of today?
I think the best thing that consumers can do is to ask their local supermarket to commit to higher welfare standards. We have seen this now in the UK. Half of the retail industry in the UK now has committed to high shrimp welfare standards, eliminating eye stalk ablation and incorporating electrical stunning to make the slaughter process painless to animals. So, and this really comes on the back of consumers really reaching out to their supermarket and saying, "Hey, I like to eat shrimp, but I would like my shrimp to have been produced in the most ethical way possible." And the most ethical way possible from a retailer perspective, when they pass policies like Marks and Spencer's has, and Tesco and Sainsbury's and Albert Heijn, all of these in Europe, what they ask from their suppliers is you can no longer use eye stalk ablation as a method of spawning baby shrimps. You need to incorporate electrical stunning, so you need to incorporate humane tech to reduce suffering at the moment of death, and adjusting stocking densities to the actual number of animals that each system can carry comfortably, and not stretch it to the limit. And finally, guaranteeing that certain water quality parameters are met, so enough oxygen for the animals to breathe in water, and the absence of certain poisonous gases that are detrimental to animal welfare. But first and foremost, what people can do is reach out to their shrimp dealer and ask them to source from certified shrimp, and just always push the envelope of what the level of welfare of their supply chain should be.
Yeah, we recently interviewed I think Dulce Ramirez of Animal Equality Mexico, who was talking about the Mexican constitutional change for to incorporate animal rights into the Mexican Constitution, which was a major victory. One of the things I discussed with her was the fact that anyone working on animal rights, animal welfare, always faces this real uphill struggle, because it's inevitably issue number 10 on the issue that human beings are motivated by. Here in the United States, there's like 100 serious crises going on at any one time politically. And so, to start to talk about the animals, you feel like, we'll talk about animals when we've dealt with, whatever these 5 present catastrophes are. And then, you talk about the small animals. You've really got to challenge, as we talked about in the early part of this conversation. But what you've highlighted there is that this is in fact an issue where the positive thing here is that there are measures that can be taken that substantially reduce the amount of suffering in the world, and that your organization and this movement has in fact succeeded at getting some of these measures put in place by retailers, and that has a result, right? It doesn't have an easy to see result, because the shrimp can't, write notes and thank you. But that it has a payoff in that you've managed to successfully reduce a huge amount of suffering in the world. So I think, one of the things we can emphasize here at the end of this conversation is the way that this issue, which may seem initially a quixotic or even utopian issue, is in fact a quite practical way of making the world a much less horrible and harmful place for a lot of conscious creatures.
I couldn't agree more. And as a corollary to that, typically both governments and retailers and generally corporations are comprised of individuals. And many individuals genuinely care about the welfare of animals that they are in charge of. And those individuals will be receptive and can affect change inside organizations or inside governments, but they will not be aware that this is an issue that's important to other folks, and potentially won't even be aware of the issue if we don't make it salient. Mm-hmm. And thankfully, as you said, these very welfare improving interventions or suffering reducing interventions should not be expensive either for supply chains. There are organizations like the one I started, but I'm sure there are others that can support the industry to transition to higher welfare practices, and we'd be very keen to do so.
Well, we certainly appreciate you taking the leap from the world of from the amoral world of finance to working on something like shrimp welfare. I feel like one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is that hopefully our listeners and readers can be inspired by this example of thinking seriously. Well, what is a way that I can use my life in order to improve the welfare of others? And shrimp welfare may seem a counterintuitive way of doing it, but I think people should read your article in Asterisk magazine, which is very compelling. And they should go to the Shrimp Welfare Project at shrimpwelfareproject.org to find out more about what you've done so far and what can be done in the future. Andres, thank you so much for joining us on Current Affairs today.
No, thank you. I really appreciate our conversation.
Thanks for watching. This video is a product of Current Affairs Magazine, the country's leading independent left print magazine based here in New Orleans, Louisiana. Go to currentaffairs.org to find out more about us, and currentaffairs.org/subscribe to subscribe to our absolutely gorgeous bi-monthly print edition. Get it in your mailbox. You can also subscribe to the Current Affairs News Briefing, the Current Affairs Podcast, or you can subscribe to our digital edition. Current Affairs is entirely reader-supported. We have no ads. We have no corporate backers. We depend on you. So please consider purchasing a subscription or making a donation to Current Affairs today. We are a 501c3 non-profit organization, and your donations are tax-deductible to the extent allowable by law. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.